Joining us now for more reaction to this dramatic story, the firing of James Comey, is attorney David Bruno right here in studio and GOP strategist Chris Nywame. Good to see both of you. The question for you, David, first is why now? Why was Director Comey fired?
Sure, like Sean Spicer just said in the clip we just watched, this is not about Donald Trump. This is about the Deputy Attorney General and his recommendation to fire. And in fact, what we're seeing is this was a nomination by the president that actually happened in January, and it took until April 25th, that the Deputy Attorney General was actually confirmed by the Senate. It was a 94-6 vote. And he was the one that wrote a memo to the Attorney General recommending this. And in fact, it was not only what he did for the Clinton investigation, but it was the press conference. And most recently, he actually testified, Dr. Comey testified before the Oversight Committee on May 3rd. And he said he'd do it again. He would give another press conference, and that was the point that they had to make that decision.
Chris, what are your thoughts? Was this long overdue? What are your thoughts?
I agree with David on referencing the memo from Rodstein over at the Department of Justice. I think it's just a new chapter for the FBI. The president probably felt it was time to move on. I think many people may agree that, Director Comey was sort of a statue in this political ocean where, all the decisions he was doing, folks wanted him to go one way or the other, just listening to Senator Schumer's comments. And I think it might be beneficial to have a new leader in there as we move forward and move past this political chapter post-election.
Chris, I want to stay with you and ask you about the Democratic response to this. We heard from Chuck Schumer last night calling this a mistake, but it was the Democrats who blamed Comey for essentially Hillary Clinton losing the election, but now they're questioning the firing of Comey. Can you explain that?
Well, first I have to confess, every time I hear crying Chuck Schumer, I do laugh out loud a little bit. But I think the fact is, 2015, Senator Schumer was calling for stricter vetting with immigration policy, and then a year and a half later, he was crying about it. I mean, it's partisanship, hyper-partisanship. So I don't think you can look at that, take that too seriously. But I do think that, investigations that are going on will continue. And if anything, the president removing Director Comey increases his scrutiny in the media. So I don't see a political advantage. Like I said, it might just be time for that next chapter at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Well, David, that brings us to our next chapter. And so what is it? You have Trump saying we need new leadership. There was really this feeling that he had way too much power. Your thoughts? Where do we go now?
Yeah, well, the key is going to be this Russian investigation. And in fact, the same Deputy Attorney General that made this recommendation, he's in charge of the investigation. And by the way, again, he was confirmed.
How important is it to get somebody else in place?
A special prosecutor.
Well, the special prosecutor is going to be up to the Deputy Attorney General. Right now, he is the man. He is running this investigation, the same man that was confirmed by the Senate 94-6. And it's his decision whether or not to bring in the independent prosecutor.
Is one needed, Chris? A special prosecutor here for the Russia investigation?
It may be. I mean, I think that the comments by Mr. Krauthammer last night on Fox News Channel are interesting. I mean, essentially, there's no crime. They're looking for this. But the comparisons to Watergate, I've heard Watergate more than I've actually seen it, and I live in Washington, D.C. So yeah. I think it's possible, but it'll proceed the way it is now. And I think if something comes out that's significant, we'll know about it.
And something else Krauthammer said last night, that in terms of Comey being fired, he made enemies on both sides. And when you have no one to stand up against you, unfortunately, this is what happened.
Absolutely.
David Bruno, Chris Nywame, thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, joining us now for more reaction to the firing of James Comey is attorney David Bruno and GOP strategist Chris Nywame. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Chris, I want to begin with you. There was really this feeling in Washington, from what I understand, a lot of people felt that Comey had overstepped his bounds, had way too much power, and were even afraid to say it, and would only say so in closed quarters because that his time had been overdue. What do you think?
Well, I think that reacting to Senator Schumer's comments about why now, he said sort of dramatically, my response to Senator Schumer is, why not? I mean, Director Comey was becoming sort of looked at as sort of like this statue and this political wind that goes back and forth. And with the politics of it, you just have to sort of distill that and look at what's at play there. I mean, obviously, Republicans and Democrats want to gain ground on each other. But when it comes to the Bureau, I think it was just time to move on. And the president's made that decision at this point.
I wanted to talk about the long list of reasons why people thought Comey may be unfit for this role, Chris, and one of which was Uma Abedin's emails, and that he said there were hundreds of thousands, then they had to go and correct those. Was that an embarrassment? Was that just one of many reasons that he's out the door?
It certainly could. I mean, at that level, we expect some level of not necessarily perfection, but high performance. You know, he was in that role, and you know, I agree with David. I would also say, though, again, you know, people have been prosecuted for less or punished for less than with the things we saw in the Hillary Clinton probe. So to hear the former Attorney General and hearing his name and objective just doesn't come to mind when I hear Holder. Right. He's a pretty ideologue in my view, but I don't disagree. Yeah, Director Comey certainly made an error there, and I think at that level, an error can be a termination.
Would you define this, David, as a fresh start for the agency or a crisis?
I think what this decision, in large part, is because of what Director Comey said in front of the Senate, and he said he would do it again. He would come out with a press conference. He would make the decision. He would upsert the DOJ's decision-making process, and that's the problem there, because we have a number of high-profile investigations going on, and the DOJ had to make sure that he didn't do it again, and that's in large part why they made this decision.
And so with this firing now, how quick, David, is it for them to replace him? How important is it?
It is important.
Because the Dems say it's very telling, and that if there isn't a replacement, that it almost insinuates that there's some cover-up going on.
Well, there's going to have to be a nomination, an appointment process, and a confirmation through the Senate. You know, and yes, it's going to take time, I would imagine, because this is a hot spot. And Director Comey himself made it a hot spot with his press conferences and all of the public statements on these very important investigations.
And Chris, as we wrap it up here, what would you say to Democrats saying that this is a cover-up for something else?
Well, they're going to have their opportunity in the confirmation process to make those voices heard. And if anything, the president's scrutiny on him will actually increase. So I think that, you know, when you're president, you can make those removals. And this is just the constitutional process playing out. And we're going to go on from here and see what happens at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
All right, David Bruno and Chris Neiwem, thank you both for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Good to be with you.